Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. Tonight's features include Driving in the Moonlight. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. I am Adam Thomas.
And I am Thomas Mariani.
And now, to present the best podcast named Double Edge Double Bill Award, our guest, Yonathan Habtemichael.
The envelope, please. And the winner is Double Edge Double Bill!
Oh my god, I can't believe it! Oh god! Oh, thank you for that lovely trophy, Jonathan. I didn't expect this at all. I have so many people to thank. I want to thank my parents. I want to thank my sisters. I want to thank anyone who's ever been a guest on the show. I want to thank Podbean, who deals with us all the time. I want to thank all of the people who, I want to have as guests, but they rejected us with those beautiful cease and desist orders. I want to thank, oh my god, there's so many people. Adam, who else do I thank? You know what? I want to thank anybody who's ever directed a movie that has been discussed on the show. I want to thank my, lawn guy. I want to thank, you know what? Adam, am I forgetting anybody? You know what? Adam, I am forgetting somebody. I'm forgetting about the person who was with me this entire time, who I couldn't do this show without. Of course, I have to thank Satan, my boy down there. Thank you so much, for never stopping believing in me. Oh, that's it, Adam. Go ahead.
Son of a bitch.
Oh, we're getting played off. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much.
God damn it.
And scene. We all had our fun. But thank you, Yonathan, for putting up with this bit and being our guest for this episode on Best Picture winners.
It's an honor. It's just great to actually be recognized.
It's an honor to not be nominated for this one award show that we made up for the stupid intro bit. But yes, so we are doing an episode on Best Picture winners because the week this is coming out is the week leading up to the 91st Academy Awards. I guess we should talk a bit about our own history with the Academy Awards. Obviously, the big industry award show that everybody points to. An Oscar means something. It's the big one. It's not like the Golden Globes where they bribe people. It's not like the other bullshit awards that most people don't give a shit about. The Oscars are considered the main deal. I think that often is very unfair to especially the movies that are nominated and even win, because it attaches an unfortunate stigma.
There are even some great movies that people talk about, and they're surprised that that those films even have won any Oscars. Like the biggest one, Citizen Kane. Everyone keeps talking about Citizen Kane is the best movie ever, or people try to defend bad movies by saying it's not Citizen Kane, yet no Oscar Gold.
No, that went to How Green Was My Valley. Everyone's favorite movie.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, the stigma, look at poor Cuba Gooding Jr. I honestly think winning an Oscar killed his career.
And even for movies I also really like, just get kind of attached with that one, Best Picture or whatever. I genuinely really enjoy something like The Artist. But it's a movie that constantly is just that one over all these much better movies. It's I agree, it's lesser than most of those other nominees that year. But it's also just if it had not gotten the stupid Oscar push, it would just be it was a fun little tribute to silent movies. Now it has this pedestal it has to be on and be criticized for forever.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate part, actually. I felt expanding to 10 nominees was supposed to at least give us other films that more mainstream audiences prefer, but it seems to bring out more artists, and there are a lot more people who complain altogether, The Shape of Water won last year, and I thought it was a phenomenal movie, but I had college friends and old classmates on social media saying, what the hell is The Shape of Water? I feel there's also that level of stigma that the Oscars claim to be of prestige, but most general audiences either don't care because it's not the films they watch, or because of what Thomas has been saying, like the stigma of that movie gets picked over these at least 3 other great movies. And I feel like we have a very good example for at least one of our picks. You guess which one.
Stay tuned to find out.
Like when I was younger, I absolutely cared about, which one is, nominated this year and everything. And you can ask Thomas, last time we spoke, I didn't know any of the pictures nominated this year other than Black Panther. I mean, I've heard of them. The Oscar push to me isn't what it used to be. Like, I just form my own opinions at this rate. I think it started with Crash. And it's just gone from there.
No, yeah, I mean, I agree with that, because I think Jonathan and I have only really followed the Oscars in recent years because we're mutually part of a little movie fantasy league thing, and the Oscars are sort of like the big Super Bowl party. And that's why I've been watching it for as long as I have as of recently. If I wasn't a part of that, I wouldn't really give a shit. Because it's like we mentioned, it's just like, it just kind of brings up this sort of movie nerd thing of just like, why wasn't this nominated? Why wasn't this nominated? And I kind of got over that shit. It was around the time of like something like a Crash, where it's just like, it's just, who cares? let it be a thing. It's a fun movie nerd thing, and like that's all it really should be. So, and obviously now we're in the middle of a Oscar campaign where it's really struggling to be relevant. The ratings keep going down every year, and they've been trying to do things like, we're gonna make the show short, and people are like, fuck you, you're gonna cut out categories, and they're like, fine, we'll show all the categories. We're gonna have Kevin Hart host. That's a bad idea. I guess, maybe no host? What do you want? That's what the Academy's doing. Just like, what do you want from us? But, let's talk about our 2 specific choices, which we'll start off with, the good pick that we got from Adam was the 2016 winner, Moonlight, and then afterward we'll talk about the 1989 winner, Driving Miss Daisy, as we decided at the end of last week's show. But we'll start off now with Barry Jenkins's Moonlight.
At some point, you gotta decide for yourself who you're gonna be. Can't let nobody make that decision for you.
Do it, move. You gonna raise my son now?
I got you, I promise. I'm not gonna let you go.
I'm your mama.
You're in the middle of the world, man.
Moonlight, rated R, this Friday.
So, Moonlight, as I mentioned, it won for the 2016 Oscars. That came out November 18th, 2016. Written and directed by Barry Jenkins, which was based on a unpublished play called In Moonlight, Black Boys Look Blue by Terrell Alvin McCraney. It was nominated for Best Picture that year and was against Arrival, Fences, Hacksaw Ridge, Hell or High Water, Hidden Figures, Lion, Manchester by the Sea, and most infamously, La La Land, because I guess we should get this out of the way now, that unfortunately it seems the current legacy of this movie is the infamous incident at the 89th Academy Awards, in which Warren Beatty was given a Best Actress extra envelope, and initially announced La La Land as the winner, and then all the La La Land people rushed onto the stage, and then they were like, oh shit, no, wait, Moonlight, you won Best Picture. Which, to be fair, may be the biggest moment in Oscar history ever.
Yeah, I think so. At least one of the biggest F-ups.
Jonathan, you and I were watching that live, and that was like such a tremendous moment to watch live.
Yeah, I honestly thought that the La La Land producer was trolling, but once the actual envelope was shown in the air and it says Moonlight Best Picture, that's where we all went crazy. I will always remember because they showed the audience a lot. Like The Rock was looking all confused. Busy Phillips was talking with Michelle Williams. It was the weirdest moment of Oscar history that I've seen live. I've seen clips of the really bad production with like Snow White.
Oh, and Rob Lowe, yeah.
I'm at least happy that Moonlight won, because there was a lot of La La Land hate because it swept the Golden Globes, and Moonlight was just observed through Mahershala Ali because he was constantly winning for Best Supporting Actor, and everyone was just dogpiling on La La Land, not paying attention to any of the other films. It was just, we just don't want to see La La Land, but it was still actually somewhat good ratings. I know it was at a downward spike, but I thought the La La Land year there was a slight uptick before it went crashing down for last year's. But
Yeah, and I mean, and to be fair, that was also that ceremony. La La Land was like sweeping as well, even at the Oscars, because it won like director and production design, best actress, a bunch of stuff that it was nominated for. But Moonlight wasn't only a Best Picture winner; it also did win, as you mentioned, for Mahershala Ali for supporting actor, and then also for Best Adapted Screenplay, which Barry Jenkins and McHenry won for. And let's get into the actual movie itself, guys. And especially I want to hear from Adam, because Adam, this was your pick, and you specifically stated at the end of the last episode that you had not seen the film prior to picking it. So what were your sort of first impressions of Moonlight?
First impressions were, I mean, this movie punched me right in the friggin' stomach. This is probably my favorite surprise movie, easily of the show, if not of the last 10 years. I always wanted to see it. It's just I never got the chance. And I just figured, oh, this is a perfect opportunity. And holy shit, am I glad I picked this movie, man. I mean, this movie, everything about it, the way it's shot, the lighting, the lack of lighting, the score, the original soundtrack, the acting, just everything about it. It's just, this movie is just fucking amazing. I knew the basic premise going in, but there's just so much more in it, as far as just even subtleties. And give Trevante Rhodes more work, or better work, even.
You're not a fan of Bird Box?
No. Oh, now I want to see what is the director's next movie? Beale Street Could Talk.
If Beale Street Could Talk, yes, is Barry Jenkins' follow-up that is nominated for a couple awards this year. None of the big ones.
Except for except for Regina King for Best Supporting Actress.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yes.
But seeing this, guaranteed that I'm going to see that now. Like, that's how much I love this movie, that just seeing this one time, I'm like, okay, now I'm going to see anything this guy does.
I think he was a fan, Yonathan. Would you interpret that from what he was saying?
I mean, we've seen some interesting movies together with Adam. This is probably the first time.
Wait, guys. I didn't like it. You got to, yes.
I liked La La Land, everybody. It won.
I'm pro La La Land, you fuckers.
Oh.
I'm not pro La La Land. I hate La La Land. I'm sorry. Go ahead, guys.
Well, but, I did like what you were talking about. Something that really especially stood out to me the second time I watched it is the fact that the Oscars usually like to award showier movies. And I think it's weirdly a connection between both of our films tonight, is that they're two Best Picture winners that are a lot more sort of subtle and, well, maybe not subtle for both of them, but
yeah, I was gonna say they're
maybe more intimate.
Intimate is the better word. Yes, I agree with that. They're both more intimate, sort of lower budget films. In fact, this movie only has about like a $1.8 million budget, and I've heard from that's mostly like licensing for music and shit. But what's so great is like that they award something that's so much more understated and grounded and doesn't have that many like big Oscar-y moments to it. There are a few, despite being so much more downplayed, it still also has a 3-act structure, and there still is a lot you can engage in just on a very human level.
What I've noticed in more recent years, we're like the last 20 years for the Oscars, they do tend to award more of the character-based stories, because the majority of the Academy's membership are actors. So while there are more showier acting performances in many Best Picture nominees and winners, I feel like there's still a recognition of the subtle work, and I feel like that's what really gives that punch up. Like, I really dug Moonlight. It was like my top 5 of that year. But what really got to me really was the actors really worked well together in making the story about Chiron. And that is very hard, because usually when you talk about these character-based Oscar winners, they're more of, you have this one person, most likely a guy, and he's just doing this great performance, and there might be a really good scene from an older character actress, and she'll get Best Supporting Actress, and there's this up-and-coming guy, he may get Best Supporting, or they'll give it to the old gay guy. There is a formula to it, and I feel like Moonlight transcends the limitations of that while bucking against at least the showier prerequisite.
Right, yeah, because, I mean, the only showy performance I would argue in this movie is Naomi Harris, which is not to downplay her at all. I think she works really well as Chiron's mother who has a crack addiction. But at the same time, she does have a fair share of even subtler moments. And what I also really love, Barry Jenkins is the current master to me of a shot that feels plucked from your memory. In terms of, like, there's so many great shots of people, like, staring directly at the camera, and it feels like it is plucked from your memory in a crystal clear, almost like HD sort of sense. It feels like you're plucking, like, a moment out of, like, Minority Report from your memory. And it's so beautifully presented and striking and stark that it feels like if it's a beautiful moment, it's one you want to treasure forever. And then for the horrible moments that happen in life, it feels like it's something that's so crystal clear and obvious in your head that you can never get it out, even no matter how much you want to. That's what I think especially comes off in this movie, and If Beale Street Can Talk also has this so much. And I think it's a big credit to the cinematography of both those movies. Those things just burn in your memory, and you feel like you are in the perspective of that particular character at any point.
Again, double on the kudos on James Laxton, who is the cinematographer of Moonlight and If Beale Street Could Talk. Those shots of, like, zooming in on Naomi Harris, either when she's asking money from Chiron or when she is yelling at him, like, those feel even like proto first draft level shots compared to the stuff in If Beale Street Could Talk. This guy, I am shocked that he's not doing work in other movies. Like, he just only seems to be working with Barry Jenkins. Again, with that intimacy, not only with the character acting with each other, just looking at them as if you're actually looking at the person, because the movement of, like, your head shifting around, like, a lot of, like, first-person perspective shots in other films are just that steady shot and the person's just in the center or off to the side. But it feels natural. I can't believe I overlooked it the first time around, but it's like the beginnings of some great aspect of cinematography, which is why I really wish this guy actually gets recognition. It took how long for Roger Deakins to get his Oscar?
15 fucking years, I think.
Oh, shit. All right.
Yeah, so the best examples of what you guys are talking about is probably Chapter 2 with the teenage version. The scenes of him just staring directly in the camera, and you know, oh God, when they make him beat him up, you're like, oh God damn it. But the way he's looking in the camera, him and Kevin both, it's almost like it's an ultimate betrayal, but also like, I understand why you're doing this. Fuck, this kid just couldn't catch a break in this movie.
No, and also a credit to even the before they actually have the fight together. The shot where, like, it's Chiron leaving, and then the bully, the Patrick DeSeal character, just swims around him like a fucking shark. I love that shot so much. It just is like a perfect encapsulation of, like, feeling trapped within the circle. Is like not just him, like, circling around, but all the people slowly gathering around as that's happening, just because, like, no shit's gonna go down. That feels like, once again, it's another moment where it's like it's perfectly orchestrated, but it also feels very natural. Just in terms of, like, he's sizing up Chiron, he's getting ready to send out Kevin, and then the moment Kevin goes into view and he says, like, yeah, hit this motherfucker, you're instantly just like, oh no. Not you, Kevin. It's you, Kevin.
Of a bitch. Yeah. I'll tell you what, though, when he breaks the chair over his fucking back, I'm like, good! Yes! Do it! And then he gets in the system, so that it really doesn't work out for him too well.
I love the fact that even with that character of Terrell, who is arguably one of the more villainous characters of the movie, they do emphasize, like, after that amazing shot where he just beats the shit out of him with the chair, Terrell's just, like, squirming there like a child. And you get the implication just that, like, it's not so much any of these individual characters are villains, as much as, like, this environment they are, you know, growing up in or living in is completely destroying them. It's like, he's an example. Obviously, there's so many other examples, like Mahershala Ali and Naomi Harris, but it's a consistent thread throughout the movie that even affects characters who could be just a mustache twirling villain of sorts in the wrong hands. And I think that's a great thing as well for this movie. It's just like, it doesn't feel like there are heroes and villains as much as just people who do shitty things and live to regret it.
Exactly. We keep talking about Mahershala Ali, but we never actually talk about his character. He's the man that finds little Chiron in an abandoned crack house, but he's the big dealer selling the crack to everyone,
including his mother.
Yes. He understands that there's a level of system where we have to protect people, but he's in the system because he can't actually do substantial work. Like, he can't just go up and run for city council and try to clean up Miami. The best he can do is sell drugs and give these lost young boys either a job or get nurses who are basically negligent to their sons to have some crack. I know it sounds so weird when I'm saying it, but yeah, basically.
Yeah, and it's funny, the scene where, young Sharon confronts Mahershala Ali, and do you deal drugs? Yeah, does my mom do drugs? Or however it plays out. And just, dude, fuck, this movie hits me every time. I'm thinking about it getting verklempt. It just destroys him, his whole foundation right then and there, Juan's. And I thought it was so good how they cut right before he had the full meltdown and crying. They didn't show his vulnerability, like, too much. He still had that mystique, because I would imagine he still had that with the Sharon character.
You can see, like, tears starting to escape. Mm-hmm. The first one where he lets his guard down, because prior to that, he's, like, the neighborhood, almost hero, where he's just like, hey, everybody knows him, everybody likes him, except when he, like, confronts Naomi Harris, and she's just like, motherfucker, come on. You're giving me crack.
Oh, yeah, she puts him right in his fucking place. Yeah.
You're gonna raise my son better than me, even though you're giving me that crack? Yeah, we know how this relationship works, and you're trying to go against that. Come on, this isn't gonna work. And the thing is, she's someone else who could have been portrayed as a total villain, but she is more just like, once again, a victim of this environment, and somebody who does shitty things and lives to regret it. Especially just like the scene where adult Chiron visits her at the halfway house that she's in. And he's just like, I just work, and they'll allow me to stay here. And I'm sorry, I never showed you the love that you needed at that point. It feels like such a very real moment, but it still pays off a 3-act structure. That's the genius of this movie. Really, is that I remember when it came out, what I jokingly called it, compared it to admittedly a movie I also love. It's Boyhood with conflict.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's basically what it is. I love Boyhood, but that movie is completely missing conflict, and it's just more about seeing this kid, grow up. Versus this kid's growing up, but there's constant conflict around him. I think it does such a great job of doing a very naturalistic story, but also there is a structure, there is 3 acts, but you just don't feel it. You feel like you're just living Chiron's life, and you're having these big escalating moments that are very small. Like, I love the fact that the tension of the 3rd act of this movie is 2 dudes who are going to meet up in a restaurant after not seeing each other for 10 years. Mm. There's so much tension in a very simple conversation that's going to happen between these 2 dudes.
Well, I mean, there's obviously a little more to it than just 2 dudes are going to meet up who haven't seen each other. I mean,
but the basic tenet of it, what is going on in that scene is 2 people are meeting up together, but there's so much story impacting that. I'm just saying the general action is just, hey, everyone, you want to meet up?
Exactly. The point, as we said, with showier Oscar winners, there's either some sort of big battle or bombastic speech and everyone's cheering, but it's been slowly built up, them being as kids, them having that sexual encounter, the fight, and all of the interactions they had in those first 2 acts leading up to making the men that they are. It's just a beautiful crescendo, but it's not someone hitting a gong. It's more like a xylophone. It has some sort of real merit and beauty to it that's just not just a big, loud, showy thing.
That's another reason why I love this movie so much, that they didn't go that route. They didn't have this big revolutionary speech by Sharon at the end towards Kevin, or really vice versa. God damn it, I love this movie. Fuck me for picking this. in a good way.
It's funny, Adam, because you said the Sharon does not have a speech or there's a big revelation. I can't help but think of the current Academy Award Best Picture nominee, Bohemian Rhapsody, where Freddie Mercury is coming out to his current wife, and at the end of the conversation, she just says, "You're gay!" It's that type of really crass idiocy that makes me love Moonlight.
Yes, I love that when he's a kid and his mom says, what she says to him, the way he walks, and you don't know, and then the little boy asks him, am I that? I don't even want to say the word; it's such a dirty word, but this is what they call me. Am I that? And he explains it to him, but the way he explained it to him, he's like, no, you're not that. You might be gay, but you're not that. And just for them to go that route, to even give the Juan character even that much heart and sensibility. Like you said, even at the end, it's not like, well, I'm gay. Obviously I'm gay. You're gay too, I think, right? I hope. That would have been so funny. But there was none of that, thank God. I mean, none of it.
It's a much more beautiful, sincere moment. Like, I think that's the thing is, when Chiron reveals the fact that just, like, you're the only man that's ever touched me, that's a big fucking huge moment.
A big moment.
But it's played so underhandedly. It's played in just such a way, it's like, you know, man, this also happened. Like, I never really got with anybody. You could have easily seen the big one, just like, I never had a man touch me after you. Like, it could have been so much more stupid and showy versus that. It plays it so, it hits so much more. It just reveals it offhandedly, but in a way that's still very direct.
And even to the point to where I was so happy that it didn't end up either A, them kissing, or B, in bed. Just the way it ended, I thought, was so beautiful and touching. Where he's just got his head on his shoulder and he's rubbing his hair. I mean, dude, god damn it, I'm getting all fucking emotional again. Fuck you, man. Fuck everyone. This movie shit.
That's Adam's Oscar clip. Just like, this movie made me feel things.
Right. I don't like to feel feelings, god damn it.
It's also a good sign of actually showing black sexuality. Usually you have films where you have a sex scene. They do in certain angles where they feel like it's just people don't want to see it, but they don't do the same sort of actions for white counterparts. Like, especially with homosexuality, you could show intimacy without needing to have people in bed. Like, it may actually be one of the detractors for Brokeback Mountain, because they just went at it, but they still had the beautiful emotional stuff. Moonlight just shows it as a natural thing instead of just, yeah, I'm a dealer and I'm a cook. Want to have sex? Okay.
Yeah, look for the Oscar Beach remake, The Cook and the Dealer, coming this November. Just a nice. But no, I think what also works, obviously, like we've mentioned, like Trevante Rhodes, but also a lot of credit to Andre Holland and all of the other actors who portrayed the younger versions of Chiron and Kevin. Which for Chiron, the youngest version is Alex Hibbert, the teen version is Ashton Sanders, and then Trevante Rhodes is the adult version, and then the childhood version of Kevin is Jaden Peener. Jarrell Jerome plays teen Kevin, and then, as I mentioned, Andre Holland. What's so great is the fact that apparently none of these actors like met with each other or really looked at each other's footage, which is insane, especially for Chiron, where each of those actors feels genuinely like the same person who obviously has evolved with each step, but has so much of that same personality that lingers throughout, particularly anytime any of those three are at a table and they have their arms crossed and they're kind of like looking off into the distance or looking down and being awkward. It feels just like, holy fuck, this is the same guy. This is clearly the same guy from each age, because that's always something when you like watch movies is, okay, child actor to adult actor doesn't always fit. It's seamless with this movie, and I think it's pretty incredible.
Credit to Barry Jenkins. People just think a director just points where the camera should be pointing at. Like, they have to interact with the actors. That really shows that Barry Jenkins has been pretty much short-shrifted with Best Director nominations for 3-4 years now.
If you look at them all three side by side, they look like they could maybe be cousins. They don't look all that the same. But the way he directed them with their nuances or their looks or even their pattern of speech or their body language, I mean, like you said, Thomas, it's seamless. Like, there was not 1 second where I'm like, it doesn't really look like him. I'm like, oh yeah, that's him. Absolutely. What the hell? Has he got a time machine? And through the tears, I'm trying to figure out time travel.
I mean, the only time I would argue it kind of feels like, and this is probably my smallest, littlest complaint with the movie, is maybe Jarrell Jerome as teen Kevin does not quite resemble either the younger version or adult version of Kevin. I would say that's the one thing. I think it's mostly like the facial structure. That's the one time, but at the same time, that actor's still great, and his chemistry with Ashton Sanders works as like two people who are like, oh hey, we know each other, we've been friends for a while, we've known each other through school, but then when they come together on the beach, and I'm sorry I phrased it that way now, I really regret phrasing it that way. I didn't mean that. That was not an intended pun for once. Not a pun intended. The way that those two characters just meet and interact on the beach, and then it's a very simple, honest moment where the two of them, interact this way. It could come off in a way that feels, a lot more sort of like laughable and silly if it was done poorly. But in that way, it's very
exploitive. Or
exploitive. That's true. It's very small. It's very intimate. It's very beautiful, and I think it especially comes off when you have Ashton Sanders getting dropped off, and he just has that smile. It's not like a big, showy, just like, oh, I just met the boy of my dreams. It's just like, I had a moment that was great. It's one of the wonderful ones where I got to be myself. And I got to interact with someone in a sexual way I've wanted to, but couldn't because of this, neighborhood that completely is homophobic and awful. It's such a great, small, beautiful moment that really showcases just how great this movie can be in very subtle doses.
In fact, when the encounter first starts to play out, when they give each other a look and they're moving in slowly to kiss each other, the whole time I'm going, no fucking way. Finally, this kid catches a goddamn break. And then the very next day, I'm like, no, damn it. He finally found love, son of a bitch.
I want the Adam Thomas commentary for Moonlight now.
It would just be me yelling. Be yelling and sobbing.
But I love the fact that it's not even like, oh, I found love. It's just like, I got to be myself with a person.
He didn't have to hide for 5 minutes.
Yes. He didn't have to be so reserved. He could be himself with this guy, and it's very beautiful. And I think it especially shows off something else I really love about this movie, just from my own upbringing. Probably the biggest thing I can relate to, because Barry Jenkins, shout out fellow FSU grad. This is part of, I think, a great unofficial trilogy for the distribution company A24 of their Florida trilogy, because I'm a Florida native in case you didn't know, and I think this movie, along with Spring Breakers is the first one, and then the one that would follow this up is Florida Project, get everything right about the state, which is all the griminess, all of the shittiness, all of the racism, homophobia, all of the negative aspects, and then the occasional beauty that comes across. I think especially on that scene on the beach, it's a beautiful, intimate moment. It's also on one giant, large Miami beach. It looks gorgeous in the moonlight, and such a great factor of this, or especially when probably the big iconic image of the movie when Mahershala Ali is teaching young Chiron to swim as well. I think gets that across beautifully as well. Just there's so much grime and dirt and awfulness around this entire place, but there's a hidden beauty within that really comes across. And I say this is, because Florida gets to be the butt of the joke, and it is a joke in a lot of respects, but I think all three of those movies do such a great job portraying the state for all of the negative and occasionally positive aspects that it has.
I never actually looked at it from that perspective, because I forgot The Spring Breakers was an A24 film, but I am completely fine with a double feature of Moonlight and The Florida Project, even though I have issues with the ending, but I agree. Both show interesting aspects of Florida that really get overlooked, especially with advertising in the media. People only think of Disney World and Miami. No one cares about the actual people. And I feel like that actually is the highest accolade I can give for Moonlight, is the entire cast. Mahershala Ali and Naomi Harris do get the recognition, but I feel like even some of the actors we haven't even mentioned, Janelle Monáe, she was there for a few scenes, but she still shined with someone as great as Mahershala Ali by her side.
Because this is the year that she popped as really an actress, because she was obviously known as a musician prior, and then she had the double whammy of this and Hidden Figures, which Hidden Figures is obviously, it's much more of an Oscar-baiting movie, but she shines in that, alongside obviously two really great actresses with Taraji P. Henson and Octavia Spencer. Obviously, they're great, but then her in the middle of it, she really is the breakout star there. And here she also displays a lot of that, especially when it's something small, once again, having Chiron make a bed. And how you can tell, she sees, this kid is clearly has something on his mind, but I'm gonna become more of, a motherly figure to him and teach him how to do just something simple. But gonna kind of chide him along the way. She feels so warm and inviting, but at the same time very grounded and real.
Yeah, she's got sympathy for him, but she's not gonna let him get away with shit either. She was fantastic in this movie, too, though. And her and Juan, they felt, even though they only shared the screen, maybe 2 scenes, did feel like a genuine couple. It felt like there was a history between the two of them. It just, they bounced off each other incredibly well. And, dude, I'll watch anything Ali's in. I mean, the fact of the matter is, God damn, is he fucking good. He was on screen for 12 minutes, something like that.
He's one of the bigger examples of an Oscar winner for like less than 20 minutes of screen time. What is so great about his character and what sticks is how his sort of lessons and his sort of regrets pass along to Chiron, where especially a moment that is so underrated to me, but the moment that really sort of hit me after, obviously, all the stuff that happens in the middle section is so brutal, but the first bit of the third act that hit me hard was seeing him dressed up, and I'm like, oh my god, he's dressed up like fucking Juan. And you're finding out he's a drug dealer. It's just like, oh my god. It just carried with him. Like, he was the only positive sort of paternal influence in his life, and he carried that to be, I should be a drug dealer, because that's who, like, my biggest role model was. And that, like, just hit me really hard, too. That's an underrated moment, I think. Just the moment of seeing him dressed up, just like, oh my god, he went down the same path. It hurts so much. And you are with Andre Holland when he says just like, wait, you're turning, man? Why are you doing that? Well, that's not you. And he says like, you think you know me?
Yeah.
Through the chest. Just like, oh, hard.
What got me was that I realized he calls himself Black, which obviously was a nickname from Kevin, but going to Mahershala Ali's a moment after swimming with Little Chiron, like, he explains the original title of the play when he's running around in Moonlight on Midnight with all the kids. Like, this woman says, "You look blue," and Little Chiron took that as, does that mean that's why people call you Blue? And he says, no one calls me Blue, but people call him Black, and that stuck with him to just meld it together. Like, he still sees Mahershala Ali as like the ultimate perfect example. But even as he's emulating him, he still had that insecurity and referred to himself not by his birth name, but by a nickname. That was what really got me, as much as him just being a drug dealer looking like Mahershala Ali.
Nobody can tell you who you are. You gotta decide that for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Give me the Oscar. I just delivered that perfectly, motherfuckers. Supporting actor, please.
Oh, God.
Well, we've talked about this movie a lot, and we could go on forever on it, honestly, obviously. But you know what? Let's wrap up our thoughts here. Jonathan, your final thoughts on Moonlight.
This is one of the few recent Oscar Best Picture winners that I can say that everyone can enjoy and should definitely check out if they haven't. Like, this, surprisingly, I didn't know about the statistic. Obviously, it's the first LGBT film to win an Oscar, but the first film to feature an all-black cast. Even in my mind, I was about to say, what about 12 Years a Slave? I'm like, oh yeah, the slave owners. I really dug this entire cast. Barry Jenkins is a wonderful director, and he's still doing great work. The cinematography is gorgeous. There's very few things that I can actually complain about, and I want this movie to be remembered far more for itself rather than its connection with La La Land with that whole slip-up.
Adam?
Well, you know, obviously I was fangirling over the movie the whole episode just because it is the first time I've seen it. But with that being said, there is no question that I will watch this again. And probably again. And probably again. I can't stress enough how much I loved this movie and how much everybody should see it. And it's funny, you know, I just recently watched another movie that was up this year, you know, Hell or High Water. And, I mean, these are my two favorite movies that I've seen in a long time. It's just, they're so different, but I'm just saying it's just odd that they came out the same year. But this movie, it's like I can't wait to watch it again. And I can't wait to have people who haven't seen it or maybe didn't give it a chance, you know, have them watch it, and just so I could talk to them about it and see what they might have noticed in it that I didn't the first time I watched it. I mean, the cast is just fucking amazing in this movie. The cinematography, the soundtrack, like I said earlier, it's a beautiful movie. And like I said, I don't like using that term. I think I've used it once on the show before, but this is a beautiful movie. I love this movie.
Well, and to be fair, Adam, to you and several other people who might not have seen it, you're not in a small bunch, because it only made about $60 million, which, to be fair, made up its very small budget very quickly. But by that statistic, it is the second lowest grossing Best Picture winner, only behind The Hurt Locker. So it was definitely a movie that, like, when it won, it was over a lot of movies that made a lot more money, like La La Land made like some $150 million or something.
Yeah,
like
that was a juggernaut.
Yeah, that was a huge Best Picture winner in terms of box office, and this one, obviously, it wasn't as much, and I do agree that I think it got kind of lost in the shuffle with that connection with La La Land at the Oscars, which I'm a fan of La La Land, but at the same time, I can definitely agree that I think Moonlight's the better movie because it's not as big as I was showing, like maybe a La La Land can be at certain points. But I think that with Moonlight, it's like we mentioned, it's so subtle, it's so understated, it's so beautiful with what it's presenting, with like how the cast is presented or the direction. Like, this is a moment I forgot about, we didn't mention it, but the sort of biggest sort of showy moment in terms of cinematography is the bit where Adult Chiron picks up his buddy and they go out to make a drug deal, and the camera is hooked onto the window, so he opens the door and it closes with him. And that's like the biggest showy sort of cinematography moment, and sort of just like, hey, mount the camera on the door. But it keeps you immersed in what's going on at the same time. It's a movie, as you mentioned, I think Trevante Rhodes really was a standout for me when I watched this first time. Though also a lot of credit to Andre Holland, who we didn't talk about a lot, but he interacting off Trevante is so wonderful. Like the scene where they're at the restaurant and he's like, oh, hey, this guy just came a couple weeks ago and put on this song. And that is such a beautiful moment, and especially there's a lot of sexuality in that moment where just Andre Holland turns on the song and he just puts his hand on his chest, and it says a lot without being too overt.
Oh yeah, dude. The way they're looking at each other too. I mean,
yes.
Oh yeah.
I would definitely say it's one of the better ones of this decade, but at the same time, it's also one of the ones that I could actually watch again. Because there's one like, for example, 12 Years a Slave, which we kind of mentioned. That's a great movie. I don't know if I could ever watch that movie again, because it's kind of rough to sit through, necessarily, versus this is a much more tender, intimate, beautiful story that makes you feel a lot of emotions, but at the same time, it does so in a way that's very watchable, very engaging. If you have not seen Moonlight, definitely give it a chance.
It's free on Amazon Prime right now.
As we're recording, yes, it is. Now, gentlemen, let's steer away from this conversation. Now I can do the puns, motherfuckers, because this movie deserves it. It is Driving Miss Daisy.
My mother's a little high-strung. She can say anything she likes, but she can't fire you.
I don't need you. I don't want you. And I don't like you saying I'm rich. What are you doing?
I'm trying to drive you to the stove.
Morgan Freeman, Jessica Tandy, Dan Aykroyd, Driving Miss Daisy.
Did you have the air condition checked?
I don't know what for. You don't ever allow me to turn it on.
Hush up.
Goodbye. Good luck. Good God.
It's driving me crazy. I don't have anything.
Racism!
Woo! Lots of it.
So, Driving Miss Daisy was the Best Picture winner of 1989, came out December 15th, 1989, from director Bruce Beresford, the Australian director, and is written by Alfred Urey, based on his play of the same name, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 1988.
Oh, fuck.
Speaking of awards maybe not deserved, I haven't seen the play.
In middle school, I read the stage play, and it was all part of adaptation, so we also watched the movie in comparison. Really, comparing the screenplay to the stage play, I'd say maybe 3 or 4 scenes aren't in the play, and like one line, like the racist cop in Georgia had like an extra line. Like, I think it's pretty much just 1-to-1.
Oh, that's good. Give the racist cop more lines. Oh,
that's what we all need, clearly. But this was the Best Picture winner, like I said, 1989. It was up against Field of Dreams, Born on the 4th of July, Dead Poet Society, and My Left Foot. And it also...
Oh, Jesus. Are you fucking... Come on. Like,
I wasn't going to say
it. Like, oh, good movie. Oh, good movie. Wow, great movie. Wait, Driving Miss... Oh, okay.
And it also won at the time Best Actress for Jessica Tandy, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Makeup, which I would at least argue of those, I don't think the makeup one was undeserved necessarily. I don't think it was bad old age makeup for the time.
Yeah, it was alright.
But this was my pick, and this was one I also hadn't seen, but always got sort of a bad reputation for what we're kind of mentioning, the other movies it was nominated against, and even ones it wasn't technically. For the Best Picture category. Like, the biggest issue around this time, the biggest controversy, was this was the year that Do the Right Thing was also nominated. I think we could argue a better movie about race, maybe.
Yeah, well, I don't know that we need to argue it. I gotta be honest.
No. When that was only nominated for screenplay and for Danny Aiello for Best Supporting Actor. And of course, like many an Oscar conversation, the sort of conversation around this movie has less become, oh, it won for Best Picture, and more, oh, it won over any number of these other movies that came out that year. I picked this also because sort of the Oscar timing of it, because along with, say, the connection of If Beale Street Could Talk being nominated this year, another movie called Green Book was nominated this year, starring Viggo Mortensen and Mahershala Ali of Moonlight. And that one got a lot of comparisons to Driving Miss Daisy for obvious, like, sort of plot familiarities and racial themes as well. And, you know, I wasn't a big fan of Green Book, I'll say, but having watched Driving Miss Daisy, Green Book's at least a more engaging movie. Like, Viggo Mortensen, I have a lot of problems with that character, mainly because he's like a Olive Garden level Italian, Viggo's,
God.
I think, quite frankly, not that great in that movie. But he at least has a bit more of a warmth to this, you know, character who's of his time and has a lot of confusing thoughts about, you know, race and what that means. At least he feels not as malicious necessarily as our title character here. Because my biggest problem with this movie really is, I get what it's going for, because it wants to be a movie where it's like, oh, you know, Morgan Freeman is under the employ of Jessica Tandy, and through several decades of being together as driver to client, he slowly teaches her about, you know, being a bit more sensitive racially and all this other stuff, especially when it leads to the ending that happens here. It wants to kind of portray that in a hushed way, in a way that a lot of reviewers at the time, like I watched Siskel and Ebert review, and they talk about the idea that, like, oh, this isn't a movie about big, sweeping moments. It's down to earth, it's a lot more intimate, and these characters don't suddenly change, which I guess is true. You know, you gotta be invested enough to want to see a character change, and, Miss Daisy can go fuck herself. She's awful.
100%. 100%. I watched this whole fucking movie the whole time, and I'm like, all right, so this is going to be the bit where, like, he brings her flowers or something happens to her. She's going to be like, oh, Hoke, and she's going to be totally cool with him. She has to get fucking dementia first before she's like, you're my best friend. She's lost her goddamn mind. That's how she learns to love. Oh, once Morgan Freeman started talking, I'm like, oh no, they're doing it. Oh,
because Adam, you saw this around the time it came out, I'm assuming,
yes,
right?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I was also a wee lad, and you know, this was a big movie when it came out. My mom saw it, and everybody saw. I watch it, and I just remember thinking, I really liked that movie. Probably because Dan Aykroyd was in it.
Who the Academy awarded for, like, wow, you didn't play a Dan Aykroyd-style character. Oscar nomination for you. Which, to be fair, he's one of at least the better things about the movie, I'd say. He's,
yeah, his fucking accent.
It's not the best Southern accent, no. You can honestly, watching this movie with his makeup, there was just a certain point where I'm like, did he get the idea for Nothing But Trouble by looking at himself in makeup? You know what this makeup could use? A penis nose. That's what this could use.
Oh, God.
This is just... Oh, fucking hell. Okay, go ahead, Yonathan.
Adam saw, like, when it first came out. I basically saw it 10 years later. So that's still a long gap of, like, nearly 20 years since I've actually watched the movie. But the one thing that I was constantly defending about this movie, because Try Miss Daisy has that stigma of just being that bad movie about racism with the woman and her driver. A lot of people love to bring up Uncle Tom's in media, and I really felt, which Morgan Freeman even said he was intending for Hoke to be like, he's not subservient to Miss Daisy. He does step up and talk back to her, like try to make her see that she is an old woman that needs him and he needs a job. Like, that aspect I have been defending for so long. But I realized after my basically first watching in so long, he is the grandfather of all the mystical Negroes. Every single time we would have a white person who has some sort of trouble, either with golf or with being with their family, they just get this old, sagely black man or black woman or just any sort of ethnic person. I'll help you with whatever your problem is with some good folksiness and a can-do attitude and sometimes a weird twang. That's why I'm like half and half on Hoke. Like, he's a character, but he creates a horrible stereotype. And everything else about it, Jessica Tandy is awful. Like, she's just awful just to be awful. And I was surprised that Patti LuPone was in this movie. Like, I completely forgot about Fooley's wife. Yeah, she is a good actress who's just in this movie. Like, thinking back to all these other poorly executed tales of racism that we've been getting in Oscar nominees like The Help and Green Book, it's sad to say that we're actually making progress when you look at this is what we had in 1989 versus what we have in 2011 or 2012 and now in 2019. They're not the best movies. Like, I would sometimes defend Green Book, but then you had the director say something ridiculous about how it's a movie that brings people together. It doesn't. You have the writer tweeting out racist rhetoric from Donald Trump.
Who is the son of the guy Viggo Mortensen's playing, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
And they didn't consult the character Marshall Ali's surviving family at all. Because they're like, oh, we didn't know any of those relatives were around. No. But anyway, we're not talking about Green Book. We're talking about Driving Miss Daisy. Keep going now.
The point being is that Driving Miss Daisy is so bad on its execution with Miss Daisy. Like, come on. You're an old woman. You need a driver. You're rich now. You can't keep bringing up your childhood memories of, oh man, we used to just eat like snow because we couldn't get water or whatever nonsense you were saying. Like, you're 60-something and your son runs a huge company. You rich. Shut up.
Well, no, especially, like, for me, when I was watching it consistently, I'm like, okay, there's gotta be some point where I have to, like, grow somewhat invested in her. And, like, the only time she ever really treats Hoke with any kind of decency before she gets dementia, like you mentioned, is condescendingly teaching him how to read at a graveyard, which is...
God, I forgot about that.
Which is, like, such a insulting scene where he's just like, I don't know how to read, Miss Daisy, and she's just like, well, what does that sound like? A buh? Buh? Is that what it sounds like? Just like, well, you're being nasty, but you know what? Maybe there's something else. I'm gonna try with this movie. Maybe there's some other reason that we can get invested in her. And then the moment that completely killed that and turned the whole movie against me was the bit where they found out that the temple was bombed on their way over. And she is in the back, like, crying, like, oh, I can't believe this is happening. And he tries to draw a bit of a connection where it's like, you know, I mean, it kind of reminds me of when I was a kid, my friend's dad got, you know, lynched, and it was a horrible moment. We just saw it happen. And you would think that maybe not a big, showy moment of, like, you know what, that's such a terrible thing, and I'm so sorry, and maybe we can connect as people. I don't need that. But what I don't need is her being like, how dare you bring that story up? What does that have anything to do with what's going on here? That was the moment where I'm like, fuck you. You're lacking basic human empathy on any level. 100%. Get dementia. Fuck off.
Right. 100%. Because something affected her, so now it's, you know, it matters. Well, dude, and not even that. So she fucking half-ass, real bitchy, like, she tries to teach him how to read. Then she gives him the fucking book. Which, okay, whatever, you know, blah, 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 blah. It's not a present. I don't do presents. So you're like, oh, okay, well, maybe there's a little hope here. Then she goes to go see Martin Luther King Jr. speak without him. She makes him stay out in the goddamn car.
Okay, that was a little bit on Hoke being like, bitch, you should have told me beforehand instead of when we were driving. Like, that's the type of fire that I like about Hoke. Like,
I agree, but then she could have just been a decent person and relented to be like, yeah, you're right.
You know, I'm just trying to say, like, at least Hoke had the agency. Like, I feel like even if it is Martin Luther King, if this person who's been so cantankerous with me just tries to be nice just this one time, I would be just as offended as Hoke.
And the way that she says it also is so condescending, we're just like, you know, my son said, hey, maybe I should bring you to this. Wouldn't that be silly? You wouldn't want to go to that, right? And he says, like, well, you know what, maybe I would, and maybe you should have told me earlier. And she gets offended by that. And then he says the big line that would have, like, I think actually affected her, maybe, of like, oh, you know, some people say things keep changing, but some things stay the same. While he's going to open the fucking door, and then she, like, slams it in his face, like, fuck you, and then leaves. That's supposed to be, like, a big cathartic moment. And it's, like, outside. To nobody. He says that to no one.
Yeah. It's just like as Hoke said with the whole fact that some things are changing, but things are pretty much staying the same. Like, this is a good reflection of how the Academy is. Because, like, yeah, we talk about Do the Right Thing being pretty much shut out, like kind of like how Beale Street is now. But the whole point was there are so many young filmmakers who are actually doing great things that were hungry. Like Oliver Stone did Born on the 4th of July that year. The Dead Poets Society had a great funny man doing a dramatic role with Robin Williams. Like, there are all these great emotional and also resonant stories and character arcs, and this wins.
Yep.
Because we had an old lady who was a very prominent actress in the history of Hollywood getting an award.
I'll say that I don't think Jessica Tandy's performance is necessarily bad. I think it's just a problem of she is portraying such a despicable, unengaging character, but she's doing a good job at it. I think that's the trouble with it. Because honestly, if we even got any kind of introspection into like her thought process on this, because I would argue Dan Aykroyd is at least the better character because we do get a bit of introspection with him, the way that he runs his business. There's that scene where he talks to Jessica Tandy about, I want to go to the Martin Luther King thing, but, I have my business constituents who might not want to associate with me if I do go there. The apathy of society and racial evil that's going on there. It gives you a bit more introspection to this guy who isn't necessarily intending to be evil, but is supporting an awful institution by what his actions are. I think that instantly makes him a more interesting character than Miss Daisy, who's just like, fuck you, I hate everybody.
Oh, yeah. This is actually one of the subtle things about it. Like, they're Jewish. They're Jewish in the South. So there is that totem pole of classism, anti-Semitism, and racism. So yeah, he feels so worried because even though he's a prominent businessman, he's still Jewish. That will always be stuck with him. And I feel like that is far more engaging. Like, maybe we should have been focusing on Booley trying to deal with working in Atlanta in segregation times. Maybe.
Yeah. And also, he's much more enthralling just because he's had to deal with this shit since he was born. He's had to deal with this awful lady. Instantly, I'm way more on his side.
Awful. But, I mean, fuck you and your salmon.
Oh, God.
Fuck you with your salmon.
And that's another example, like Yonathan was talking about, where like that, of where the Hope character exists to like show her a lesson, where she's just like, he stole something, and I'm gonna get him for this, he's gonna get fired, I hate this guy, I can't believe he'd do that, and she's like, oh, Miss Daisy, I'm sorry, I took a can of your salmon, I got another one from the Piggly Wiggly, you mind if I just put it in the cabinet? Like, not giving him the benefit of the doubt at all that you might do that.
Yeah, of course not.
No.
Shouldn't even give him a chance.
Nope.
Now, obviously, I 100% refuse to do the accent. Just because, nope. Why?
And you're referring specifically to Morgan Freeman's accent.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. It is so just Foghorn Leghorn mixed with Song of the South, just the worst, most offensive thing. And I mean, what?
I would argue Dan Aykroyd's more Foghorn Leghorn.
Yeah.
Dan Aykroyd, well, to be fair, looks more like Foghorn Leghorn.
Well, that's true, yes. He could play live-action Foghorn Leghorn if we ever got that movie. But you know what, Yonathan, how do you feel about the accent? Do you agree with what Adam's talking about on that?
No, I honestly look at it from the fact that it's a specific era, a specific region of the South, that while it feels ridiculous to hear someone say that in 1989 to let alone 2019, it's still a reflection of the dialect that you would hear in the South. And I feel like Morgan Freeman, who also did Hoke on Broadway, that he had the actual seriousness and a nuance to actually use such a ridiculous dialect to work. I'm not saying it's phenomenal, but it works. I feel
does it work though, or is it kind of?
Especially when you compare it to all of the maids that are in this movie, where Idella is just meow, or pretty much like that type of level. Like they're either that or they don't speak at all.
She's straight up Hattie McDaniel at points.
Yeah.
I do agree with Jonathan. I think like it doesn't feel like he's going to Uncle Remus levels that you compared it to necessarily.
No.
Not necessarily. He's not singing Zippity Doo Dah at a certain point. But I still feel that, at the same time, I think what's more the problem is that Hoke is constantly on that teeter-totter with what Jonathan's talking about, between being like a genuine, actual, three-dimensional person and being a voice of reason that Miss Daisy shoves off. He can't really, he's rarely his own person. I think most of the scenes where that happens are when he's actually talking like Dan Aykroyd. Like when his introduction where like he helps that guy out at the elevator, tells him where the thing is to like switch it off, and impresses Dan Aykroyd a bit with his knowledge. Like there's scenes like that where I think Hoke gets to actually be like a real dimensional person. Then he's around Miss Daisy, and partially because of like the situation he's in with her, and how he has to behave around it necessarily, but also because of the way the script's written, it just gives him so much more of like now Miss Daisy, maybe we should be a bit more simpatico on this.
There are moments that kind of work that I'm okay with in a vacuum, but it's part of a larger whole of, this character is still awful. This guy, scene by scene, is either really awesome or just plain subservient. Like it's a give and take, but there's a lot of taking. That's all I can say.
No, yeah, and I think we should especially talk about as the movie sort of goes into its ending, is where really I agree that there are so many problems where it's like at the Martin Luther King speech thing, you can tell that she is making some sort of change. She looks over at the empty chair and she kind of looks contemplatively. It's Jessica Tandy's probably best moment in the whole movie. And you're like, oh, you know what? Maybe this is going to be her not completely changing, but turning over some kind of leaf. And that leaf is dementia. Because in literally the next scene, she's just like, oh, my papers. Oh, I need to make sure my children's homework is graded. Oh, what am I going to do? And she goes very over the top in a way that also feels kind of offensive to somebody who might have dementia. It doesn't feel great. And then, like Adam mentioned, that after this huge dementia episode where Morgan Freeman's trying to calm her down, that's when she says, Hoke, you're my best friend. It's a moment that wants to be earned and is completely unearned.
100%. It takes her slipping, like completely falling into the abyss, to be like, all right, now I'll let you in a little bit. You miserable old black man. You taught me something now that I forgot how to be a hateful, fucking dirty piece of shit. Oh, I hate her so much.
Well, Adam's given all these Oscar-winning performances this week.
Oh. And the thing is, like, look, dude, think about Jessica Tandy's performance in this. I'm like, man, yeah, she deserved the Oscar. I'd argue that Fried Green Tomatoes, she deserved the Oscar maybe for that performance. She was fantastic in it, if you want to talk an older Jessica Tandy. But in this one, she didn't really do anything but just have a sour look on her face.
But the makeup! She put on makeup, Adam!
What? She was 82! How much was 81? She didn't put on any makeup. They put her in glasses and dyed her hair a darker gray in the beginning. That was it.
Again, this is the late 80s Academy Awards. They're all old people, old white people who act.
Are you trying to tell me that white people run Hollywood?
I think you need to sit down.
Yeah, where it's like, what, we just recently had the Academy body is now like 1/3, like, of different colors?
1/4.
One quarter. Yes, they just turned that over. Just recently.
1/4 white, right? Isn't that what we're saying? What's going on?
Honey, we have to sit down. But no, also, then we were talking about this scene, the bit where she's actually in the old folks' home, and it's the scene that I knew about before I ever saw this movie, is where it's just like, it's a quiet moment where the two get together, had a Thanksgiving dinner, and he feeds her the food. That's supposed to be this big moment, just like, oh, guys, can't you see, in a world where there's so much strife and so much contention between races, can't we get together and just have a quiet meal and help each other out? You know, the middle-aged liberal white fantasy that's just like burst onto the screen with this terrible moment that's just like, no, once again, not earned at all.
But the problem is that it's a sign of still a black person having to serve a white person.
100% agree. Oh, you taught me so much tolerance now that I've lost my mind. Feed me my pumpkin pie. My hands don't work no more.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jessica Tandy has resurrected herself for the show.
Great!
Oh no! Kill her! Kill
Zombie
her!
Jessica Tandy.
Oh, wait, she's a zombie? Kill her!
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, it definitely just becomes so subservient. And I think another factor, really, you mentioned sort of the Uncle Tomism of this movie. It's a shame that, unfortunately, this kind of typecasted Morgan Freeman for a bit in that role. Because you can tell, Clint Eastwood watched this movie, and he's just like, I know what I'm gonna do with Morgan Freeman. And did that several times over with Morgan Freeman. Even in really great movies like Unforgiven, that would win Best Picture a couple of years later. It's Morgan Freeman as Clint Eastwood's black friend. That happened a lot. And unfortunately, it kind of like affected him for a bit until he kind of wormed out of that and became more of a leading man on his own right. And I guess that's sort of, as a thing before we get to closing thoughts, has this movie really impacted culture that much in any way? Is there any lasting thread now, I'm almost 30 years later, for Driving Miss Daisy in this modern world?
Yep, it's called Green Book. You already talked about it.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, The Help, Green Book, Crash,
Legend of Bagger Vance,
Mr. Church with Eddie Murphy.
Oh, God. Oh, fuck. I forgot about that one. Oh, wow.
I feel like there's another big one I'm forgetting.
Oh,
Monsters Ball with Billy Bob Thornton and Halle Berry.
That was a little arguable. Yeah.
Pick Shades.
Yeah.
Well, I guess on that whimper of a note, let's go into our final thoughts then on Driving Miss Daisy. Jonathan, our guest, start.
Driving Miss Daisy has the legacy of being the movie that should not have won because of racism. It really perpetuates the aspects of people's views of racism being just individuals just being mean to minorities. But even though it has moments where it shows the systemic aspects, especially being in Georgia, yet never actually explaining it or giving it context. It is a very tone-deaf film that deserves 99% of its flack, but I will defend only that 1% of half of Morgan Freeman's performance. Jessica Tandy just gave a performance for her to get an Oscar, which did it, and Dan Aykroyd's career got worse after this, so I don't want to fully blame it on Driving Miss Daisy, but it's probably because of Nothing But Trouble.
Yeah, that's a bit more on him. Perhaps as the writer, director, producer, it might have been his fault. Adam.
Yo, just straight up, I'm not going to say a lot, but fuck this movie. Ugh, Jessica Tandy. Not like the person, or the what used to be a person. That's just disgusting and going down a road I want to go down. But the character, what a piece of shit. Drive her off the fucking cliff. I don't give a shit about her. I don't give like literally. I just fuck this movie.
There are much better movies to watch with Jessica Tandy. Like, you know what? Battery's Not Included, even.
Oh my god, I love that fucking movie. Good call on that one.
Yeah, watch Battery's Not Included. It's a cute little movie, and she's really good in it.
Yep.
Or Fried Green Tomatoes.
Tomatoes. Obviously, she's a classic Hollywood actress who was acting for decades prior to this. But yeah, I mean, the sentiments all around are pretty conclusive. It's one of definitely the worst Best Picture winners I've ever seen. It's not the worst. We almost covered the worst with Crash. And we might have been even more angry than we are right now if we were sitting here talking about fucking Crash. But it does, I agree that like the systemic issues, much like in our own society, continue and trickle from Driving Miss Daisy, as it's like I mentioned, this sort of, middle-aged white liberal fantasy of like, oh, can't we all just get along, even though we aren't really confronting each other about serious issues? That's it. Just this movie in a nutshell, and I'm amazed the play won the Pulitzer Prize if it's this close to the fucking script that's here. And I don't think any of the actors are necessarily terrible, but it is definitely just they're saddled with very dated, very underwhelming material that I would have said, oh, maybe it worked for the time. But then again, like I said, this is the same year as goddamn Do the Right Thing, which is, as we mentioned, inarguably the far better film about dealing with like racial relations with both racist characters and black characters who have been under persecution at the same time. And it's a great crowd pleaser that goes into super serious moments. It's one of Spike Lee's better movies that deals with a lot of the same issues. So this movie at the time was just sort of like an old guard example of just like, oh, isn't this not just a sweet little movie to do this? And it has a sweet exterior, but inside, much like Jessica Tandy's character of Miss Daisy, it has a bitter, bitter core that just radiates bile.
Yeah, it's like the Academy is run by white people or something.
Oh no, I think Adam's getting the dementia. He's forgetting we talked about this earlier.
Jonathan, you're my best friend.
I'm not going to do the accent. No.
And as we steer away from that, that is the end of our discussion on the 2 Best Picture winners, but we got a little bit more before we go. First off, we got some feedback to read, which, if you go to the Double Edged Double Bill Facebook and Twitter page at DEDBpod, every Monday we put a feeler out for, related to our topic about, hey, what are your favorite and least favorite examples of this particular topic we're doing? So naturally we did Best Picture winners. And, first up, Brian King says, my personal favorites are both about the toll war takes on people, The Hurt Locker and The Deer Hunter. And then Forrest Gump beating out Shawshank Redemption is just plain farcical. I think everyone kind of came around to that conclusion after a bit. So. Even though I remember really loving Forrest Gump when I was younger, I dread revisiting it. I haven't revisited it since high school.
It's in the back pocket, buddy.
Oh, I have to face that eventually, Adam. It's warranted.
Yeah.
I did rewatch part of it over Christmas with family. I'd still say Tom Hanks' performance still works. But yeah, a lot of the sappiness of the story of all that, I can understand now, why people be bitter about it. But I'm just happy the Hurt Locker beat Avatar, really.
Right.
That was great.
Thank God. Yes, I agree.
Well, especially given the juxtaposition of the lowest grossing Best Picture winner of all time beating the highest grossing movie of all time. And not to mention the fact that it was ex-wife versus ex-husband at that point. There's so much juicy details there. And it's also the better film, as we've covered a bit in a previous episode where we talked about Avatar. But then James Rodriguez says it may be best known for the way it won the Academy Award, but Moonlight is more than that. A masterful tale about one person's struggle to stay true to their self and accept who they are, emotionally told by people at the top of their game. Silence of the Lambs also deserves a mentioning, which is likely to be the only instance of a horror film winning the big prize. On the flip side, Shakespeare in Love is a tiring game of spot the nods to the Bard's plays over a generic 2 hours centered on a dull romance. I'm also not a fan of Annie Hall, especially when Alvy Singer is chlamydia levels of irritating.
At least we agree with Moonlight.
Well, that's true, yeah. And I mean, look, there's a lot of reasons to maybe not like Annie Hall related to this. Potentially. It's just trouble of, the last time I saw that movie, though, was before all that really sank in about Woody Allen's past.
Sure.
That's my biggest struggle, is really just, I love a lot of Woody Allen movies.
I do too, but I can't do it anymore.
It's good. I have to wait till he dies. I think we're all in that mode of just let's wait till he dies. Then we can revisit some of them.
Until the circumstances of how he dies. It depends on how he dies. It's painful, then I could probably revisit them.
I won't fault anyone if they want to go back to his movies. I just feel like if you try to watch movies you haven't seen made by him, I feel like that has a level of ickiness because at least you have the nostalgia feelings of those past movies. Honestly, I'm surprised people aren't bringing up the fact that Annie Hall beat Star Wars for Best Picture. I feel like that is probably more prominent to bring up nowadays.
I mean, yeah, and I mean, it's also there are certain ones, I could see myself revisiting Annie Hall in about a decade. I may never be able to see Manhattan again. But you know what, and he mentioned Shakespeare in Love. That's one of the ones where I would cite as an artist example, where I think that movie's a cute little movie. It's not Saving Private Ryan, which it was up against and infamously won over. But I think
insanity.
But at the same time, I still think I enjoy that movie for what it is. It's a cute little sort of historical rom-com. And I think it's another example where the stigma of winning Best Picture has more deflated that movie than given it a fair shake.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Silence of the Lambs is pretty dope, too.
Sure, yeah. Silence of the Lambs is great, dude. Silence of the Lambs. Buffalo Bill is still one of the scariest on-screen villains of all time to me. He's terrifying.
Even for all the problematic reasons.
Yeah, oh, yeah, no, sure. just him. It's just Ted Levine. It's his voice that makes him scary.
Now, the rest of our feedback is feedback about previous episodes, in reference to our last episode about romance films. Jerry Chandler says, The Room is the more tragic of the two films you covered. At least you see the two of them reunited in Somewhere in Time. Plus, well, you don't laugh throughout the wrong moments that are in Somewhere in Time. I mean, technically, I guess, based on the basic structure of the story, The Room is more tragic.
Yeah, but we don't know what happens if Lisa and Johnny are reunited at the end. You don't know if Johnny's going to be up there waiting for her.
Oh, that'd be so great. Just the remake of the Somewhere in Time sequence.
Yeah. Right.
Oh, Lisa is beautiful.
I still love you. I did not hit you. I killed myself. Oh, hi, Mark. You're in hell. Oh.
And then Stephen D. at Waiting FTH had to say, in reference to that same romance episode, by fluke of timing, I caught this one on Valentine's Day. How apt. My favorite romances of all time are All of Me, and this is a German movie that translates out to Female 2 Seeks Happy End. Thank you for subtitles. And across other media, Farscape. Worse is probably anything with either Greg Kinnear or Katherine Heigl.
I thought there was one Katherine Heigl romantic film that worked, but it's
Knocked Up? Maybe?
Yeah, I guess that's the one.
It's the dude bro romantic comedy.
And I like As Good as It Gets with Greg Kinnear. I mean,
that's the thing. I think Greg Kinnear had. I definitely will agree that problem. Like in the late '90s, he became sort of like the Bill Pullman character in Sleepless in Seattle, where it's just like, oh, you're the second-rate guy that she dumps because you're so nice. But he got a lot better once he sort of embraced, especially his comedic chops in like the last 10 years or so. He's been so much more. I haven't heard of the German movie he mentioned, but All of Me is a great movie.
I don't think I've seen All of Me.
The one with Steve Martin and Lily Tomlin. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't think I've seen it though.
Well,
It's
off my show.
All right.
Well, now you're out. But before you go, also Riley Baldry actually had a suggestion for us, where he says, I have a suggestion for a future topic for the show. As we get closer to the upcoming 2020 presidential campaign, I figure an episode on politically themed movies would be interesting to hear. Recommendations for good and bad movies, Ides of March, and the campaign, respectively.
I'm down for this. I mean, I think it's a pretty good idea. We actually discussed last time we spoke about potentially if a certain movie wins Best Picture, that we can maybe shoehorn this topic in there.
Don't hold your breath on that movie.
I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm just, could happen. But eventually, I think this is definitely a topic that we will cover.
And of course, we're referencing Black Panther, the most political film of last year.
Hey, it is royalty.
There are plenty of political movies I wouldn't mind covering, and Ides of March and Campaign are pretty good examples, like good and bad. Though I will say, in the Campaign, Dylan McDermott's so fucking funny in that.
He's hilarious in that movie.
There's a point where it's like Zach Galifianakis and his wife talking, and Dylan McDermott's just eating cereal in the background of the scene, staring at them, and it's the funniest fucking thing I've ever seen. But no, yeah, I mean, Ides of March also. That one is sort of like the underrated of George Clooney's recent directorial phase, before he kind of started making bad dad movies after that.
Oh. Suburbicon was one of the biggest disappointments. Trying to be half of a Coen Brothers movie and half of another movie talking about racism in the most awkward way through the lens of a white guy.
Oh, well, you know what? It all comes full circle, doesn't it?
It's like poetry. It rhymes.
Yes, Mr. Lucas, it does. All right, we want to thank some people before we leave. Thanks to Chris Oliver for the theme music used in our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Emily Scarda for the art on our show. She accepts commissions at fiverr.com/eescarda. And we're going to use you to help pick the two movies at the end of this, Yonathan. But thank you for coming on, and why don't you plug yourself a bit? Where can people find you on the interwebs?
You can find me on Facebook, Yonathan Habtemichael, H-A-B as in boy, T as in Tony, E as in Edward, M-I-C-H-A-E-L. Yonathan's with a Y, not a J. And you can also find me on Twitter at black_Gendo. That's black spelled normally, Gendo, G-E-N-D-O. And I'll bitch about political stuff, anime, and movies. Actually, speaking of that, go watch Alita. It's actually a fun live-action anime adaptation.
That's the most politically charged statement you've made on the show. I think is that you like anime.
Oh no.
Also, you can find us over on @DEDBpod, which is on Facebook and Twitter. That's where we put out those feelers we mentioned every Monday. And you can also email us with feedback at doubleedgedoublebill@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at NotTheWho'sTommy. Also, I write about movies at marianithomas.wordpress.com. I'll probably have an Alita review up at the time that we're recording this. And you can find Adam being driven by me all around. Isn't that right, Adam?
Go fuck yourself.
Oh, that and Miss Thomas.
Yeah. Ding, 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 ding.
Yes, and make sure to subscribe to us on iTunes, rate and review us there, and also on any of the other platforms we're on, Podbean, YouTube, Stitcher, Spotify, all those places, because that gets us boosted up a bit. If you rate and review us, gets more people to notice, and we need the notice. We need your attention, because you like us. You really, really like us. Right?
Yeah.
We'll even accept an iTunes review that's just that. Yeah. 5 stars.
Yeah, you're right.
That's all we really want. But before we leave, it is time to pick our movies for next week. And next week's topic has a bit of a somber note attached to it, because we recently lost a great character actor in the form of Dick Miller. We lost him about a month ago, but we decided, we want to fit in an episode about him, because, we've also lost someone like, we should mention while we still have a foot in the Oscar pool, we recently lost, like, Albert Finney, your very celebrated, very multiple Oscar-nominated, great actor, but he got a lot of attention and praise. Dick Miller only gets attention and praise from weirdos like us. It's a shame. Yep. He's one of the great blue-collar schlubs out there. Maybe the definitive one, I would argue.
I would say so. This was the absolute hardest picking I've had to do.
Because you have the 2 bad movies, and I have the 2 good movies related to Mr. Dick Miller. And each of us have assigned a number between 1 and 10 for each of those movies. And we would usually each say a number between 1 and 10 to pick each other's good and bad picks. But when we have a guest like Yonathan, he gets the chance to do it. So Yonathan, between my 2 good movies, number between 1 and 10.
Let's go with number 8.
All right. At number 6, I have a movie that Dick Miller said was one of his favorites to work on and one of his favorite characters he ever did. It is Tales from the Crypt presents Demon Knight.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I love
he's Uncle Willie.
Uncle Willie. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And at number 1, I had actually the movie that many would argue sort of created the Dick Miller persona, was his first big collaboration with Roger Corman, his starring vehicle in Bucket of Blood from 1959.
Oh, wow. I wouldn't even have thought you would have picked that. Great.
It's a very weird movie.
Yeah, it's incredibly strange.
It's such a weird fucking movie. He basically kills bohemians, and he turns them into art. It's really fun. But now, Yonathan, for Adam's bad picks, number between 1 and 10.
Let's go with number 5.
At number 3, I have from 1986, Chopping Mall. Yep.
Well, that'll be interesting.
Because he's got a name in it. That's like the only thing, you know what I mean?
That's true. There are plenty of bad movies where he's just like security guard or janitor.
Right.
Right.
It's so hard to pick, man. And then the other one I had, Space Raiders from 1983.
Not as familiar with that one.
Oh,
yeah,
it's
I haven't even
pretty
heard of that one.
Well, you know what? You got a horror double feature when you didn't mean to.
No, wait, but then again, he worked a lot in that genre. And we'll definitely talk about all of that when we come back next week. But Jonathan, thanks once again for doing our picking.
Oh, it's a pleasure. At least I picked some good nominees. Academy.
Oh, damn.
Oh.
On that sick burn, it's time to say goodnight, everybody, and we're sorry the show ran 3 hours long like the Oscars.
See ya, guys.